Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, for the opportunity to speak to Clause 2. As your predecessor in the Chair had mentioned, it is a very narrow clause. I don't intend to go into some of the issues in terms of the royal assent, but I did want to take this opportunity to talk about the commencement. We don't know when this bill will come into force. It may be Monday, it may be Tuesday, but when it does come into effect, it will set in train a chain of events to allow the government to negotiate with other telcos, to allow the tax that is going to be collected under this piece of legislation to become collected, but also it will allow at some stage, because we know that this bill will become an act, it will allow the second stage of the Rural Broadband Initiative to get underway. Now, while we have noted some concerns about that on this side of the House, I did want to use that in terms of that chain of events that starts when this bill becomes law to take issue with something that New Zealand First member Richard Prosser said earlier on, and that is that he was suggesting that members on this side of the House, or from this party more or less, were using issues or constituents that were coming to us and to our electorate offices to dangling them out there to use as examples of people we didn't really care about. And I would say to Mr Prosser that couldn't be further from the truth. There are a number of electorate MPs on this side of the House who have had a number of constituents come to them and ask them why their rural broadband is so rubbish. And one example of that, Mr Speaker, is someone in my electorate. I've got, like Chris Hipkins, I've got a mixed electorate. I've got the rural areas of Pukerua Bay and some rural areas in Pawatahanui. And well, there's a farm there. You want to come have a look at it? They've got livestock and everything. Come and have a look. But one person who lives in those rural areas came to me and asked me, look, my internet connection is not what I want it to be because of where I'm located. And he was in a rural area. So I looked at that case. I took it to Vodafone and said, look, this chap lives here. And I said to him, and I'm just about to get to the point, Mr Speaker, Mr Chair.
Well, the member better, because if he doesn't, he'll be terminated.
Okay, Mr Chair, and the outcome of that conversation was, and the outcome of that conversation, Mr Chair, was you're going to have to wait for the second phase of the Rural Broadband Initiative, because he wasn't going to be in phase 1, Mr Chair. And absolutely crucial for him to now get his broadband up to a speed that he wants is the commencement of this piece of legislation. I'll give him that. We want RBI 2 to start rolling out, and this piece of legislation will commence probably Monday. It might be Tuesday if we're still here. But there are a lot of people, Mr Speaker, who I guess are waiting for this piece of legislation to go through. But our point of issue with it commencing on that date, Mr Chair, is that we don't think we've had a justification around or a good analysis of the first piece of legislation, which saw RBI 1 come in. So before this piece of legislation comes into force or commences, Mr Chair, we don't want this piece of legislation to go through without the right scrutiny of the first tranche of RBI 1. Don't commence this bill to spend $150 million without looking at the first piece of legislation, which came in and to bring in RBI 1, which is worth $300 million. We're not sure if that has been effective, so we don't think this piece of legislation should go through, which, Mr Chair, is why we're not supporting it. Why commence this piece of legislation to expend $150 million? Now, on this side of the House, that's a lot of money. They don't seem to care about the accountability, Mr Chair, of expending $150 million. We'd like a closer look at how effective that first $300 million has been before we go anywhere near letting this piece of legislation go. So, to Mr Prosser, I would say, please don't take the examples that we've used in this debate as simply something that you can throw away. They're people who we have cared for. It's our duty as elected MPs to make sure that their RBI is as best as it can be. And when this commences, hopefully that person... Mr Chair.
Jackie Dean.